Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again today for another look back into the history of the 1950s. It's a remarkable time really for mankind. It doesn't matter if it's in America or anyplace else. Don't you think, Jackie?
Well, I can only relate to America.
Okay. But we've also had some guests who didn't live in America in the 1950s, and that was everything is always so informative and just excites me, at least, about the 1950s. That seems to be my cherished decade anyway.
Evidently. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Obviously.
So, bring us into the program today.
Okay, folks, as you're looking at your screen, please note www.whilethewindmillwatch.com, that little purple banner at the bottom. There you will go. When you go there, you'll find all the sorts of information about the book, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s, which you will note is in the upper right-hand corner. You'll also note that there are a list of vendors and more information about the authors, as well as the 1950s Fun Chat. This is number 116. And isn't that amazing? We've been doing this for over a year now.
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years. My, how time flies.
Yes.
We are, I do want you to look at that little book. That is a beautiful North Dakota sunset that wraps around the cover of the book. And then you will notice in the right-hand corner that little white dot, which is a very special little dot. Our book was published in April of 2021, and an award was given to the book in April of 2022. It's an international independent press award for the regional nonfiction in the category of region, and it was called the Distinguished Favorite. So our little book is very glad to have that little medallion on the front. So today we are going to begin right now by introducing you to Alan Trenkle. He came into the world in July of 1934 and was raised in a small cattle ranch in northwestern Nebraska, 30 miles from South Dakota state line and 80 miles from the Wyoming state line. The ranch was on the western edge of the Sandhills at the end of a 25-mile trail. His mom and dad were both from the same area, and he has one younger brother. Now, Alan attended 7 years of elementary grades in a one-room country school with the enrollment of 5 to 7. Now, that's a really good teacher-pupil ratio. He attended high school 25 miles from the ranch, participated in FFA, which is called Future Farmers of America, and he participated in track. His higher education at the University of Nebraska yielded a major in technical science of agriculture. His education continued at Iowa State University, or at that time college/university, where he gained a master's of science and a PhD with a major in animal nutrition and minors in mammalian psychology and biochemistry. Wow, that's a variety. He furthered his education with 16 months of postdoctorate research at the University of California, Berkeley. Now, employment brought Alan back to Iowa State, which led to 45 years on the animal science faculty, which involved teaching, research, and other responsibilities. Alan now resides at Green Hills Retirement Community, Ames, Iowa. So, Alan, welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Well, I'm really happy to be here this morning. My daughters have had me writing some of my history. They ask me questions, then I write. So I've been thinking about this, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
We are too.
Think of us as your daughters. We're just curious.
Okay.
So, Alan, we're going to go back even beyond the 50s, just to set the stage a little bit. Your maternal grandparents immigrated from Switzerland in the late 1800s, settling in western Nebraska, while your parental great-grandparents immigrated from Germany a bit earlier. So what old country attitudes and practices influenced your life?
Well, I grew up close to my maternal grandparents, and we frequently were able to visit my paternal grandparents who lived about 40 miles from the ranch. Actually, my maternal grandparents, their land joined the small ranch that I was growing up on. So we were close by and had frequent interactions with them. Yeah, they always impressed me as being very sincere, hardworking people, and they weren't domineering. But I think they let us know that they had rather high expectations for us, and that I think was important part of my growing up. My parents also had the same expectations, and they instilled honesty and truthfulness and reality into us. And I think that's been very important in my life as I've gone forward.
Yes. Yes.
Both my grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side were avid gardeners. They planted large vegetable gardens, canned a lot. They had very large flower gardens. My grandmother had a lily pond, I remember, which was very unusual for the Sandhills.
Yeah.
And when they retired from the ranch and moved to town, they didn't move the lily pond, but they planted it flower beds and a lot of plants inside. And my mother and her two sisters, they continued that interest. And I have the interest in plants and gardening also. And I think it all comes from that early beginning.
I think it's quite interesting that they were such avid gardeners and were successful avid gardeners. And yet you're talking about the Sandhills of Nebraska. Now, how did they accomplish that? How did they get water to the plants? How did they make that work?
Well, the Sandhills it's an interesting area. I don't know if either of you've had ever an opportunity to drive through the Sandhills. Have you ever visited the Sandhills in Nebraska?
No.
We went through there one time. Mm-hmm.
Well, originally it was just like the Sahara Desert, a pile of sand that wind blew and formed the hills. But eventually, somehow or other, grass got started and established in that sand and covered the sandhills. It's well covered with grass now, but the land is very fragile, and one has to be careful in grazing it that it's not overgrazed and so on, and especially dry years. But what's underneath the Sandhills is maybe even more interesting, and that's the Ogallala Aquifer, which is the largest underground water aquifer, I think, in the world. And when that land was homesteaded, that aquifer, actually it's exposed in the valleys of the Sandhills. There are numerous lakes.
My goodness.
They're shallow lakes, but there are numerous lakes, so that water level is right up. And it was easy to actually dig by hand wells. Now, later years, it was with drilling. And there's a number of windmills in the Sandhills. I'm very familiar with windmills. So there was water underneath, even though the rainfall is probably averages around from year to year about 20 inches. So there was water, for gardening and so on. And now the land there's a lot of irrigation wells and they're pumping water out of the Ogallala Aquifer, and there's some concern about over pumping and all that, but there is currently water there underground.
Okay.
We had been visiting earlier, Alan, about your one ancestor planting a lot of apple trees in the Sandhills. Can you share that with us?
Well, he immigrated to the United States from Switzerland. He was a medical student in Switzerland, and he got crosswise with his parents. He wanted them to financially support him at a little bit higher level so he could have a different lifestyle. And apparently they refused. So he got upset with all of this and just left Switzerland and come to the United States. He settled initially on a homestead in northeastern Nebraska, and then got into difficulty with the wife, and he just up and left that homestead and took the train west, and it went as far as Valentine, and then he bought a team and wagon and went another 120 miles west and settled on another homestead on the Niobrara River. Well, that area is just on the western edge of the Sandhills, and being along the river, there was water there, and he eventually established another apple orchard. And he helped other people plant trees and develop their homesteads, and was quite active in the area. But eventually he decided he wanted to move farther away from civilization, I guess, and moved about 15, 20 miles further into the Sandhills. But then he up and planted another apple orchard.
So do you suppose all these apple orchards were relatives genetically linked to the apples he originally brought from the old country?
Well, I don't really have good knowledge of. He was going back and forth to the Lincoln where the university was. Mm-hmm. And I think he was getting some help. And I think maybe that's where he got the original trees to start his orchards.
Okay, sure. Okay, Ellen, tell us about how your life in the Sandhills.
Well, I grew up on that small ranch. I say small. It takes a lot of land in the Sandhills. The homesteading on 160 acres just absolutely didn't work. And eventually these places grew in size. So the ranch that I grew up on was about 1,000 acres, and that really wasn't enough for a living. My dad tried to raise about 50 to 80, 90 cow herd, but he often he had to take these cattle to other areas for summer grazing. And then he would always bring them home for the winter feeding. Mm-hmm. The ranch did produce enough feed to winter these cattle. Now, I just barely remember what, from very early age. They also had turkeys, and they had sheep, and a few pigs, and Mom always had chickens. So it was a very diversified farm. And now, shortly after I was probably, maybe 8 or 9 years old, they sold the sheep, the turkeys disappeared. And then when my brother and I both left the area to attend the university, my parents bought sheep again, but the turkeys didn't reappear on the ranch.
So were they good? Were the turkeys? Did predators want turkeys, or was it just that your parents decided not to have them anymore?
Well, I just barely remember the turkeys, and of course at that time none of this was in animal confinement, so the turkeys were out on the range. And quite often I can barely remember, they ended up over in the neighbor's farm or ranch, and parents would have to go get the turkeys. I think that was the main reason they didn't bring the turkeys back. But
Okay.
But the first job that my brother and I had when we got old enough to start helping on the ranch was to take care of Mom's chickens.
Oh,
Then eventually, as we got older, we helped with the cows and some of the other livestock. So that early experience gave us a sense of responsibility. That we had to be responsible for these, the help take care of these livestock.
yes.
Okay. Your house was, or your ranch was 25 miles down a long trail. So you said were there close neighbors anyway along this trail since the turkeys went visiting?
Well, I used the word trail because there weren't any maintained roads. There were no graded roads, no fenced roads. Now, as we come from town, there was a maintained road, but eventually we had to leave that, and then we ended up literally on a trail. Now, both of you growing up on a farm probably remember that the trails or roads, whatever you call them, going out to the fields from the homestead.
Where we had what were called section lines, which divided the section of land, and those were kind of like trails.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about. That's that, and my parents' ranch was at the end of this road.
Okay.
So, all right, Alan, would you please then describe the living conditions there? Did the ranch have running water or electricity or what?
Well, there was a windmill in the farmyard.
Okay.
And there was a covered tank that the windmill pumped into, and then that overflowed into a smaller tank. And then there was from that tank, there was pipe laid underground to another tank in the corral that watered the livestock. The house had running, my parents put running water into the house. There was no indoor bathroom, and there was no electricity. There was no furnace in the house. Mom had a 4-burner cook stove, much like what Janine has here. And I don't remember in the living room, I think initially they also had a wood burning stove, but what the stove in the living room that I remember was a fuel oil stove. So, and there was a tank outside with small pipe coming into the house to furnish fuel for that heat stove. As I indicated, there was no electricity, so I remember kerosene lamps. Then my parents bought a gas lamp with the mantle on it that was fastened to in the lamp, and as soon as after the first time you lit it, you didn't dare touch that mantle because it would just disappear. It was literally ashes hanging there. And used a lantern that we carried if we had to do some chores after dark outside.
So did that place eventually get electricity?
Yes. First, my parents purchased a used set of batteries and a gas engine driven generator that generated 32 volts, not 110 volts like what we have. So and one could buy 32 volt light bulbs. So that put electric lights in the house.
Okay.
but this generator and the batteries were off in another building, and then the electricity was brought into the house. Now, when it wasn't until we were at the university, and I think it was about 1954, 55, when the rural electric lines come through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
And they got the 110 volts in. Now, Mom was able to change from the wood burning cook stove. She bought, well, there wasn't any refrigeration initially, except an ice box. And then this windmill pumping water, that water was really quite cold. So she was able to keep butter and so on in a container suspended in this tank that overflowed from the tank, the storage for the drinking water. And then in the wintertime, when it was cool, there was a porch that she could keep food in and keep it from spoiling and so on. But we literally raised nearly all of the food that we consumed was raised on the farm. The exception would be salt, sugar, flour, and things of that sort. But Mom had a large garden, did a lot of canning. When in season, when fruit was in season, she purchased peaches and apricots and so on, and canned those. And she actually canned some meat also.
Yes. Yes. I wonder if that's a similar story as we go up through the Plain States, because it sounds so very much like what Mom did in the kitchen and canning and with meat, and we tried to survive on what we raised ourselves.
And we did survive.
Yes.
Well.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing I've thought about, it was 100% organic. We didn't call it.
You bet.
Yeah. That's right. Ellen, you have a very unique early education. Can you tell us about that?
And go ahead. I'll ask this later.
Well, it was a one-room school, and it was 4 miles from where we lived. And my parents, my brother was about 15 months younger than myself. So rather than hauling me to school and picking me up in the afternoon, they decided to hold me back until both of us could start school. So we started school together. In the second year, we were in second grade. Well, I should back up and say, at that time, people graduating from high school could go to college summer school, and there was one close by, relatively close by. There was a state college in Chadron. They could go there one summer, get a license, and teach in these rural schools. So the beginning teachers had very little to no experience at teaching. The first year we had one of those, but she was quite good. She got us really started in the proper way. The second year, the teacher that we had just wasn't ready to start teaching. And, kids being kids, we took advantage of that.
Yes.
And the parents of the kids in school decided this isn't working. So they made a change in the teacher and brought in a retired school teacher. And she assessed the situation. I was older than the other two in that second grade. So she moved me up to third grade. And that's why I spent 7 years then rather than 8 years in elementary education. But again, the school had no electricity, no running water. We had outdoor bathroom, toilets. There was a horse barn there on the school grounds. And we rode the horses to school, not very many times, but a few times. But some earlier years when people that lived closer to school, they did ride horses to school. So they had a barn there for horses.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have any playground equipment. That we had about an acre of school ground, so we could go outside at recess, and not all that many of us, but we fashioned our own games that we played. There was a coal shed. The heat for the school was a pot-bellied stove in the center of the room, and the duties of the students the first thing in the morning was to bring coal in for the stove. The ranch that the school was located on had a windmill right next to the school with a livestock tank, but they let us go out there and get water from that windmill and bring into the school. There was a flagpole, so each morning when weather permitted, we stood outside and pledged allegiance to the flag and then started school. And I think it was probably quite typical school room. We had these large sheets with the alphabet on, both printed as well as cursive writing. We practiced penmanship a lot. Through the years, we studied primarily reading, history, and arithmetic, and we spent a lot of time practice writing. And the teachers were quite strict on how they evaluated our handwriting. But my feeling from that experience is we learned how to read, and arithmetic. When we ended up in high school, I think we could read better than most of the students that had gone to larger schools, and we didn't have any problems with arithmetic. Now, in later years at the university, when I got into taking calculus courses and so on, then it was a little different story.
And so you were in college at the University of Nebraska then in the 50s? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What was university life like back then as a student?
Well, part of the reason well, I didn't tell a story. My brother and I ended up in high school together. I won't go into all the details of that. So then we were at the university together. We were in FFA, and we attended the state convention, FFA convention, which was in Lincoln. So we had been on campus 2 times for that FFA convention. So we were, vaguely familiar with the campus, and being in the town the size of Lincoln. The vocational ag instructor in high school, and I still don't know quite why he selected me, but he decided that I should do public speaking. So I write this speech, and he and I practice that thing. Golly, I don't know how many times, many times.
Can you give us a line from it?
No.
Oh, okay.
It was on leasing. It was on leasing land. But anyway, I won the regional contest, and then ended up at the state FFA public speaking contest in Lincoln. So I was down there for that too. One of the reasons we went, and got second at that one. I think he coached me very well. But being maybe a bit more realistic, I think going back to that one-room school, we had Christmas programs. We had that every year. Now, in the one-room school, there were curtains in the school we could put up and form a behind the stage sort of situation, and then come out. And the teachers really made us practice for that and speak up so people could hear. And I think that's one thing that helped. And that public speaking contest, and also being on livestock judging teams. Janine was on a livestock judging team. You know what the situation is. You have to give oral reasons, and you have to be firm enough to the person that you're giving the reasons to, that you convince them that you knew what you were doing.
Even if you didn't know what you were doing, you still have to talk like it.
Yeah. I think all of that really helps. You know, and then in later years when I was lecturing in class and so on, this past experience was all very beneficial for me. And it all really started, I think, with those Christmas programs in that one-room school.
So, Alan, besides mathematics, arithmetic, did you really feel prepared to attend the university?
Well,
was there some trepidation there?
There was the chemistry class at the high school. We didn't, for some reason, we didn't take that. There was mathematics. We took algebra. So when we get to university, I hadn't had a chemistry course. I hadn't had a physics course. And that was a bit of a challenge. And we didn't have a particularly good instructor that first year in the chemistry that we took. So I didn't get a particularly strong start in chemistry at the university. Now, in later years, because I selected that technical science major, I took a lot of chemistry. And it all started to make sense then a bit later. Yeah, I think there was some intimidation initially, but having been in Lincoln and on the university campus and so on, and then in the high school class that we were in, there was another set of brothers. They were together in the class, so there were four of us that were brothers. And we all went to the university together and roomed together. So I think we supported each other too. Sure. That helped.
Sure. Did you have to take ACTs or SATs back then?
No.
Okay. I wonder when
they wouldn't have passed.
Well, you didn't need to, but evidently then it's just as surprising, and it's a feather in your cap for then minoring in biochemistry. You took it from absolutely nothing to having a minor in a chemistry class. Well,
again, at the University of Nebraska, because of the major I selected, I took it was a mammalian physiology, not psychology.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. Physiology. Okay.
I took a year of that, and I actually was with the pharmacy students, professional students. And then the biochemistry class was with the dental students in the dental college. So again, with professional students. So I had very excellent instructors in both of those classes. So I really got interested in physiology and biochemistry. And by that time, I'd had enough other courses at the university and so on. Now, all of the things that we observed growing up on the ranch, cattle breeding, sows having pigs, so on and so forth, watching calves being born, all of this started to make sense. I understood the science behind it now.
Okay. Yes. And later on, you did some of your postgraduate work at the University of Berkeley in California. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and why choose that school? Why go west?
It's in his blood.
That's true.
Well, bit of a story.
Okay.
Would you rather just move on?
As you both of you are probably aware of, in beef cattle, feedlot beef cattle production, hormones are used.
Yes.
Well, that patent, the beginning of that was at Iowa State University. The major professor that I had at Iowa State had the patent for feeding diethylstilbestrol to cattle. And we did. Now, diethylstilbestrol is a female hormone, estrogen. It's synthetic one.
Okay.
And in most species, you give them that female hormone that depresses growth, but in cattle, it stimulated growth.
How
And
about
that had just been discovered about the year before I got started graduate school. So I got interested in how does that stuff work?
Yes.
And again, I'd say this goes back to, the curiosity that kids have growing up on a farm, seeing things grow and we experience on the farm. You both experience this too. We experience life and death.
Yes.
That's what life is. So, we come with that interest. And I got interested, how does this dang hormone work? So I was trying that. There were some ideas that it affected the pituitary gland, which is at the base of the brain. It produced more of one of the hormones. So I was trying to develop, for my PhD work, an assay to measure that hormone in the blood.
Yeah.
And I made a little bit of progress. But one of the faculty members that was on my PhD committee, he was a physiologist, more related to reproductive physiology, but he knew what I was trying to do, and he let me use his laboratory some. But he said, what you need to do is go to the University of California and work with Dr. C.H. Lee. I knew about C.H. Lee's work because he was the one that isolated the hormone I was trying to measure.
Okay.
And I thought the Iowa State faculty member, I said, in my mind, I didn't tell him, what have you been drinking? And he knew I was questioning this in my mind, and he says, no, I'll help you. And everything worked out that I ended up in that lab out there at Berkeley. And it was a C.H. Lee was known worldwide for the research that he was doing. And I did work out there and published 2 or 3 papers. And the day I left, I went and Dr. Lee wanted me to come in and have a bit of a final chat. And he handed me a little bottle that had porcine growth hormone in it, pig growth hormone. And I brought that back and didn't really think that much about what I really had. And then I realized I'm the only one that has purified pig growth hormone separate from that lab in Berkeley.
Yeah.
So I developed assays for pig growth hormone, and that opened up all sorts of opportunities for me with pharmaceutical companies. And
Sure. Wow. What a gift. What a parting gift to get.
Yeah, that's right.
And so your name is on many or several papers that were published in this field, along with your mentor.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
At Berkeley, and then
then
we continued publishing here.
Yeah, good. So I would like to know about what has changed. Can you tell me? Big topic now in rural America from the 1950s What's positive and what's negative as far as the aspects of changes in agriculture? This is a big topic, as I said.
Well, that neighborhood where I grew up, what we considered the neighborhood, would have been about, I don't know, 12 or so miles across, and then 4 or 5 miles in the other direction would cover where most of the people lived. Now that would be about 40 or 50 sections of land,
Yes.
which is a large area.
Yes.
But in that so-called neighborhood, there were 15 places where people lived. Now, when I started school, that had reduced down to 13. But when I visited with my daughter 3 or 4 years ago, we were back on the home ranch. Now there are 5 places where people live.
Oh, yes.
Now where I grew up, there's still people living there. It's one of the 5. So I think that's reflective of what has happened in rural America. There's this consolidation. Farms and ranches have gotten larger, and that's has had consequences. The school that I attended, that one-room school, is no longer there. My mom and her sister decided they wanted to save it, so they had it moved into town next to a place where there was a museum. So the school is still there in town. But churches have many rural churches have closed. So that's some of the effects. Now the other changes that have taken place. My dad started using horses. He didn't have a tractor. He got tractors as I was growing up. I learned to drive the tractors. So rural American agriculture has become highly mechanized, and that's positive. It's not as much manual labor as what it was. So that's a positive. And I think rural America is much more, well, as I was growing up, we had one newspaper. Well, we had several newspapers. 2 of them were weeklies and one was a daily. We did have daily mail delivery where I grew up. So our main source of information were those newspapers or the radio. The closest radio station we had at the time was in Denver. So I think much of rural America now has internet and has much greater access to information, and that's positive side of it. Now, the other, we talked about this gardening, and I mentioned that all of that was organic. There was very little commercial fertilizer. Well, my parents didn't use any commercial fertilizer or insecticide, pesticides, that or so-called ag chemicals. Now that's come into play now, and that has some consequences that we have to learn better how to deal with it.
Yes. So, Alan, this is what a change over the time. You starting your life early in the 1930s and moving on into the 40s and the 50s in being in university, and how you value that wonderful one-room school education and it gave you the boost that you needed to become the man that you are today and the wonderful professional life you had. So, thank you so much for taking us on this journey, Alan. We're so grateful that you joined us today.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate having the opportunity to visit with you this morning.
Oh,
thank you. We appreciate you too.
Yes. Viewers, thank you very much for joining us today or tonight, however, whenever you have the opportunity to view Alan's broadcast with us. And so we hope that you will join us again. So Jackie, how can you close our program?
I will close the program by reminding viewers to look for the red subscribe button, touch that, and also the blue thumbs up button. We would appreciate having that tapped, and we want you to so tell all your friends and even your family about the 1950s fun chat. Until next time, toodaloo.